Chef Anna Olson in her kitchen.
Don't you just love a cinnamon bun? Well, I know you're going to love my version because it is a giant cinnamon bun, perfect for a weekend brunch. And it all starts with that soft, enriched dough. So I have 3 3/4 cups of all-purpose flour already in my mixer. And I'm going to add to that 2 tablespoons of sugar. The dough for a cinnamon bun isn't very sweet. It's actually the filling that gives it its sweetness. I have 1 packet of instant yeast, and that's the equivalent of 2 1/4 teaspoons. The nice thing about instant yeast, you don't have to dissolve it in liquid. You just put it right in with your flour. A teaspoon of salt. I'll just put it on the other side of the yeast. And for the liquids, I have a combination of milk and water. So this is 1/2 cup of cold milk. Now, yeast comes to life just above body temperature. So to warm up this milk, I don't bother putting it in the microwave or heating it up on the stove. I just run some hot tap water and I measure 1/2 cup of that.
She lets the stream of water run over her hand, and when the temperature's right, she adds it to the milk.
There we go. And then it's best to just give it a little test.
With her pinky.
And so if you feel it's slightly warm, then you know you have the right temperature.
She now pours the milk into the mixing bowl.
I'll add 2 eggs.
She pours those in too.
And I'll start the mixer on low speed, let the ingredients combine a little bit. And then I'll gradually add 1/2 cup of softened butter. And the butter's unsalted.
It's also been cut into cubes, measuring around 2 centimeters. She pops them in one at a time as the ingredients continue to mix. And later, once they've formed into a rough ball.
Here's the dough after about a minute of working in the butter. And you can see it's soft on the top and dry at the bottom. So I'm just going to give it a little flip upside down. That way it can work more evenly. And if you don't have a mixer, you can mix this in a bowl by hand and then turn it out onto your work surface. And you want to knead it for about 5 minutes if you're doing it by hand, 3 to 4 minutes if you're doing it in the mixer.
She drops the dough hook and turns her stand mixer on again. And later, now that the dough's a solid ball,
there we go.
but also stretchy.
You can see it's a very soft dough. And that's okay. Don't be tempted to add extra flour. That's part of what makes cinnamon buns
It slides off the hook.
so delectable. That combination of the eggs and the butter in the dough is what makes it soft and tender. We're not making sourdough bread after all. And now we scrape this into a bowl.
She uses a bench scraper to get everything off the sides.
Even though it's sticky now, after proofing it on the counter for an hour and then putting it in the fridge for at least 6 hours, but you can make this 24 hours ahead of time. Chilling the dough makes it easier to handle when it comes time to roll it.
Now she covers the bowl the dough's in with stretch wrap, carefully sealing all the edges.
The real reason I like chilling the dough is so I can plan ahead. That way, I can make the dough the evening before I want to roll and bake my giant cinnamon bun.
She carries it to the fridge. And later,
Here's the dough after rising overnight, and it really does firm up nicely, even though you can see how it's lifted. So I'm just gonna set this aside because I have to get my cinnamon filling ready. Simple combination: 1/2 cup of butter,
Cubed.
a full cup of light brown sugar, and a tablespoon of cinnamon. Soften up the butter.
she does this in the bowl by hand with a spatula.
All right, in goes the sugar, cinnamon.
And now she uses the spatula to mix those into the butter.
All right, now that this is blended,
She scrapes every last bit from her spatula.
time to roll out the dough.
She now grabs the bowl with the dough in it.
I have a little dish of flour handy.
She flours her board, unwraps the dough, then turns it out onto her floured work surface.
Little flour on top.
And now she starts to knead it with her palms.
And you can see with the cold dough, it's not sticky at all, so it should be easy to handle.
She gives it another dusting of flour.
And what I'm looking to do is roll out a rectangle that's about 12 by 18 inches.
Which she now starts to do with her roller.
The other advantage of this chilled dough is it has less of a tendency to spring back on you when you're rolling. It really stays in place.
The dough is now a large flat piece.
Okay, that feels good.
She grabs the bowl with the filling.
Now, the next step is to spread that cinnamon filling over the entire rectangle.
She does that with an offset knife.
And if you wanted to turn this recipe into a batch of regular cinnamon buns, it would make you 12 individual cinnamon buns.
The filling now spread.
You can use a pastry wheel or a knife to trim the edges.
Which she now does.
I do like to trim them when I'm making a giant cinnamon bun. That way you get a little more precision when you roll it. Because this next move is the fun part. A little different than a typical cinnamon bun.
She removes the last of the edges with her cutting wheel.
So normally, if you were making individual cinnamon buns, you would roll this whole sheet up, then cut your cinnamon buns and put them in your pan. This time, I'm going to cut,
again using her wheel,
the piece of dough into 4 long strips, all about the same size. And then I'm going to start with one and roll it up. Oh, and I should say, if you like nuts or raisins in your cinnamon bun, well, you could sprinkle them on at this point. Now, I'll take this first thick cinnamon bun.
What she just rolled.
And then
she lays it at the end of the next strip.
Just tuck it underneath the second piece. Rolling. See what's happening here? And then again.
She does the same for the third strip.
Tuck it underneath. You'll never see those end pieces.
And by the end of the fourth, the roll is huge.
This is a great thing to make with kids. Won't they just love this?
She now grabs a pan.
I've got a 9-inch springform pan, and I've greased the bottom and sides. And I'll press this right in. And I find what you need to do at this point is just really squish it right down. There we go. So I'll cover this with a tea towel and I'll let it sit for an hour. Now, just as a note, you will see that the center of the cinnamon bun rises up a little higher than the outside part, and that's factored into the recipe, and it looks impressive once it bakes.
And later,
after that hour, you pop it into a 375 oven, and it takes about 50 minutes, 50 minutes to bake, because that giant cinnamon bun has to cook all the way through. Then I'll cool it for 30 minutes, and I think topping it with a glaze would just make it brunch time special.
She pops it into the oven, and later.
And check this out. Look at that giant cinnamon bun. Now, I've had this cooling out of the oven for 30 minutes, so I can really smell the brown sugar in the cinnamon. It's a little warm, but just the right temperature to put on a finishing glaze. So first thing,
using a rounded knife,
just in case there's any sugar on the outside, I loosen it from the pan.
She then lifts off the pan sides and loosens the cake's bottom.
Really, when it comes to brunch, I love how
then plates it.
There are no particular rules. So do you want to serve this to start your brunch, or do you serve it like a cake to finish your brunch? Really, it's up to you. The glaze is super simple. A cup of icing sugar, 2 tablespoons of milk, and a splash of vanilla.
Which she combines in a small bowl.
I just give this a whisk with a fork, because I like to use my fork to drizzle it. I like to put the glaze on when the cinnamon bun is still a little bit warm, because then it kind of weaves into the crevices in between all those layers. How inviting is that?
As she drizzles.
Absolutely delicious.
The glaze.
And the trick to eating it, well, you could peel away on the outside, but I like to cut a slice. So with a giant cinnamon bun like this, you can turn a regular weekend brunch into a special occasion.